Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. Mike and Broads, JF McMullen is where you can find John McMullen. It's football at Ford. By the way, interesting stuff today. Carson Wentz spoke for the first time since really his last game. I mean, we haven't heard much from him, and obviously since the draft, John McMullen was on the Zoom feed, I guess, which apparently wasn't very good, caused a delay, but he joins us now with a look at some of the things that Wentz had to say today. Johnny Mac, what's up, man?
What's up, man? Yeah, I think that word of the day, I think people got to, that's an interesting, maybe there's not a word in the English language that describes somebody's maturity level. It's either go one of two directions with that particular word.
That's right. Well,
I'm still immature, evidently.
I mean, if you are mature, just I don't know. Just the way that it rolls. But all right, let's dive into a little bit of Carson Wentz today, who got his facial planted into the turf at his last time we saw him. He did confirm today, obviously, that he did suffer a concussion. He said, quote, "It was scary stuff. You only get one of those brains and you have to protect it." And obviously that kind of, I don't know if that's a precursor, but him saying, "Hey, look, I got a concussion," and they keep, obviously it was scary, and then obviously that leads into the next situation, which is how he felt. What kind of vibe did you get from him on how he felt about the Jalen Hurts pick?
Well, I think Carson has been around long enough now to understand he has to answer that question in a particular way, and he did it well. And he mentioned his relationship with Howie Roseman is on sound footing, and he said basically didn't want to get into the call when Howie called them to say they were going to take a quarterback in the second round. So I think he did what he had to do, but I think it's human nature. And I've talked about this a lot in the NFL as a whole. I mean, the entire system, forget about quarterbacks. I mean, as I said, if you take any position in the first round, a veteran guy's not going to be happy. I mean, that's what this league is, and that's what professional sports is. They draft guys to take your job. So it's a little bit weird. And certainly from Carson's perspective, to be 2 years, in his second year, signs the big money extension last June. It had to be strange, and I think everyone understands that, but we are where they are. And you bring up that concussion. I mean, one of the reasons we had to ask Carson about that is because we haven't gotten to talk to him since that game. Obviously, he was hurt after the game, so he didn't speak. So we haven't spoken to him till before that game. And you go through this whole process and why Jalen Hurts is here, and a big part of that is his durability. And it's kind of strange from his perspective. I don't think, in fact, I know no other quarterback in the NFL played more regular season snaps than Carson Wentz. And that's just evaporated on one play early in a playoff game. It's interesting.
Yeah, it sure is. And obviously, there's been so much talk about the fact that they value that backup quarterback position a lot. But now Wentz is obviously, when he first got here, he had Chase Daniel, he had Josh McCown, he's had Nick Foles, but now he's kind of the veteran guy in the room. And I guess, he has to also balance that instead of him picking the brain of the guy sitting on the bench, they're going to be trying to pick his brain.
Yeah, and even Sam Bradford, when he first got here, was still here, and he was a veteran. So there has always been somebody with extensive experience in that quarterback room, and that's not going to happen past Carson Wentz this year. Nate Sudfeld obviously came in the same year, but hasn't played very much at all. So, and then you look at a rookie. So, yeah, I mean, he's the veteran guy for the first time. He is the guy in that quarterback room. He's always been the guy from a skill set standpoint, the number one quarterback. But to have that veteran savvy presence is important, and it has been important for Doug Peterson. And Doug Peterson, by the way, has admitted that on numerous occasions. There's no way he's going to have that this year because you can't take a quarterback in the second round of the draft and say he's not going to be the backup quarterback. The Eagles can pay all the lip service they want, but it's not like they can go out there and sign an Andy Dalton who signed with Dallas, or Jameis Winston we talk about. And it's interesting, Mike, because you bring up how they value that position. You could make a very, very strong argument that for the first time in a long time, you look at this division, they might have the worst backup quarterback situation in this division, at least short term. And I would argue they do.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point you bring up, because Dalton is now signed with Dallas, and you got a couple of different. Kyle
Allen is in Washington now, and obviously Ron Rivera has some history with him, and Colt McCoy is with the Giants, who's a veteran guy, and it's not, they're not great, but I mean, it depends what you think of the backup quarterback position. Again, Andy Dalton, not even close. I mean, that's the best backup in the division. But you can argue, again, in the short term, Jalen Hurts had a far higher ceiling. I'm not going to deny that. But short term, could have the worst backup situation in the division.
Yep, and obviously the Eagles are hoping that down the road, maybe not right off the bat, that Jalen Hurts changes that whole dynamic. But obviously we don't know what to expect for him as a backup quarterback, because they said it on draft night that, hey, by the way, we do have Nate Sudfeld here, and Nate Sudfeld not only wants to be the backup, but he wants to run his own team at some point. So I guess there would be some battle for that position. The problem is you might never see that battle play out.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be realistic. And, one of the cliches in the NFL is don't look at what a team says, watch what they do. And if you watch what they do regarding Nate Sudfeld, they don't believe in him as a backup quarterback. That's just the reality of it. To bring in Josh McCown after he hurt himself in training camp and was going to be back, and they understood he was going to be back very early in the regular season, that told you a lot, considering Josh's age and the fact that they came back on a pay cut. Remember that as well. He's not making as much money as he did last year, so he didn't have a lot of options. That tells you something as well. And then they draft Jalen Hurts. So they can say whatever they want. It's evident by what they do that they don't believe in Nate Sudfeld.
John, what was the atmosphere like in that Zoom call? I see a couple of tweets that you posted on Twitter at JF McMullen, and this was Carson Wentz on Jalen Hurts. Whatever is going to help us win, whatever that takes, whatever that looks like, I'm all for it. Now, you see that on paper, and it looks, oh, that's great. He's so open to another teammate. But what was the vibe like? Did it feel real, or did it seem like he was just going through the motions of answering the question like that?
I think both. I don't think it's mutually exclusive. As I said, Carson, he got drafted here in 2016. This is Philadelphia. I mean, there's 50 people on that Zoom call. He's known. He knows what's coming. He's prepped on what's coming by the Eagles media relations department. He understands how to handle these types of situations. So while I will say he understands how to answer the question, that's how you have to answer it. Would he be happy leaving the field in certain situations? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Would he be happy playing receiver in some kind of weird, convoluted Taysom Hill-like package? Absolutely not. Is he going to say he'll do anything to help the team win? Yes. Does he believe that? Yes. But he's a starting quarterback, and we've talked about since the day he got here, he's a type A personality. He doesn't want to take a back seat to anybody. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, by the way.
All right, John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN, of course, football at 4. What does Carson think about his wide receiving core right now? Because obviously he got a lot of new toys out there. Did you get the sense that he was, genuine about the excitement that, hey, we got a whole heck of a lot of toys that I get to play with here?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think he's genuinely excited about having some speed on the field. But I think he kind of defaulted, when talking about the new receivers. I mean, the guy he probably talked about most, interestingly, was Marquise Goodwin. And I think that's because of the veteran presence. And by the way, I'm not even convinced that he's going to make this football team. I think if you see the Eagles and their history that Doug has been here, and you saw it with JJ last season, it's really difficult for young receivers to get on the field quickly and learn this offense quickly. So I think you got to temper your enthusiasm a little bit, especially in this environment where you're not going to have an off season, you're not going to have OTAs, you're not going to have mini camp, and then you're going to say, okay, forget about Hightower and Watkins. I mean, they're just trying to make it back into this roster. But even Jalen Reagor, is he going to hit the ground running week one, be an impactful part of this offense? Probably not. It's probably going to be Deshaun and Greg Ward and the tight ends. It's just knowing the history of Doug Peterson, it's probably how it's going to go.
Yeah, he said, I can assure you that Howie and I are in a good place and on good terms. I trust him and the decisions that he is making and the plan he put into place in the offseason with adding Slay, Hargrave, and the pieces we added on that defensive side, and finally to the draft and adding some offensive talent as well, then getting Marquise. He said, I feel extremely confident in what he's doing and the pieces that we've been able to add. And, it sounded that the Eagles want to make a conscious effort, too, to utilize Wentz in a more down-the-field type of thrower with adding all this speed to the thing as well. Do you think that is a strength of Wentz, the downfield? Because they kind of, if you listen to what Howie said, I think he was on with Mike Florio, and he said, hey, go back to that Washington game, what we did in that game, and we had guys running open all over the field because we were able to throw it down to Deshaun, and we had Ertz wide open over the middle. He was screaming for the ball, but they sound like they want to utilize Wentz more in a downfield kind of, threat in terms of throwing the ball. Is that his strength?
Yeah, I do think it's one of his strengths, and I do think it's what he likes to do. He likes to throw the football down the field. And Howie talked about that during the draft, and after some of the picks, he mentioned, why Reagor versus, probably, let's be honest, certainly a more well-rounded receiver coming into the league, and Justin Jefferson. One of the reasons is because they wanted the speed threat, they wanted the downfield threat, they wanted a guy who can pop the top on the defense because Carson likes to stretch the field. And then, in some ways you already have the intermediate threats, and not only Zach Ertz, but Dallas Goedert and to a certain extent Greg Ward. So you think you already have that in place. So I think the bigger question from the Eagles' perspective is, did they make the right decision and go for traits versus production and maybe a more well-rounded option? And we probably won't know the answer to that till 2-3 years down the line. A lot of it will have to do with how this offense and can utilize Jalen Reagor and how he fits in and his work ethic and how he develops as a player. So, but they clearly, and this entire draft really from an Eagles perspective was a shift to sort of a traits-based draft process where they looked at certain skill sets of players and took guys who can run and maybe are a little bit raw coming into the league. And we'll see how it works out. And that's just not at wide receiver, by the way.
I guess automatic is a little strong based off of where he came from last year on the practice squad. But thinking about Greg Ward and the slot position, does it seem like he has a great chance to make it because of where he is and where these other fast receivers are playing the outside that Howie went out and threw darts at later in the draft?
Yeah, I mean, he's part of this team, and I think he earned that. So I think he's one of the guys who is – and not even in pencil. I mean, he's in pen. when you look at this 53-man roster. He's earned that spot. I think it comes into a lot of it has to do with sort of a domino effect. If you look at what the Eagles run and when they use 11 personnel and it's X, Z, and slot, does JJ take off? Can he be that X receiver? If he can, he's going to be on the field. Deshaun's going to be on the field at Z. And you're going to want to figure out how to get Jalen Reagor on the field as much as possible. So he's going to play probably more in the slot. If JJ doesn't take off, you probably have Jalen more outside and Greg plays more in the slot. So there's a lot of moving parts, but he's going to be a part of this team. There's no question about that.
I know Mosher mentioned this once or twice before. Do you think that there is a possibility that maybe Hightower or Watkins can find themselves in the slot if they find a way to get on the team and make the roster?
Well, injury-wise, there's always a possibility. I mean,
right.
If you're going to say beating people out, it's just – I mean, you have to – and this is where I said fans have to be realistic. And, forget about J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who's a very, very polished product coming out of Stanford, and how difficult it was for him as a rookie. Think about Golden Tate coming over as a veteran player, how difficult it was for him to integrate himself into this particular offense. And I think that's one of the – if you want to level one of the most valid criticisms toward Doug and his offensive coaching staff, it's not utilizing players correctly who don't know the entire offense. When you look at other receivers, and this is one thing I've tried to express to Eagles fans who say, look at what Terry McLaurin did. Look at what DK Metcalf did. If they're here and you're assuming they're going to do that, that's not necessarily valid, because there are other coaching staffs who will look at a young receiver that can't do a lot, but see has some talent and will try to utilize that specific talent. The Eagles have not proven they can do that. So when you're talking about later round picks and thinking they're going to hit the ground running as rookies, and oh, by the way, not only rookies, not typical rookies in COVID-19 world, I just don't see how it's at all possible. I really don't.
Football at 4, John McMullen. Yeah, and I guess the NFL is still planning to release their schedule. Are they doing like a whole prime time thing like they've done in the past with this? I mean, is that their plan?
I assume. I don't know that for a fact, but I mean, they have the schedule release show typically on the NFL Network, so I assume they'll do that, but they confirmed there's no international games, so that takes the other, and that's not, by the way, that was expected, because you have enough problems dealing with your own government. So to assume you're going to be able to handle the logistical aspect in a global pandemic with foreign governments as well, that became sort of untenable.
Yeah, obviously, and John's referring to the NFL announced there will be no international games for this year. So that means the London games, the Mexico City games, they are all out. But the NFL's plan is to release the schedule Thursday, I guess. And then they said they do have some alternative plans to kind of change some things if they need to. We will obviously be keeping an eye on that. And when the schedule comes out, we'll, certainly look at it, but we're not so sure what is going to happen with that schedule. And as you've said a lot of times, John, not having the training camps and even these mini camps, like these guys would be out there getting ready to get the playbooks. Not that they don't have the playbooks, but getting out in the field and doing stuff that could really hinder what kind of impacts these rookies that we're all interested to see. John Hightower, Quez Watkins, how are they going to fit in? Well, we're not going to really get a chance to see them do anything until who knows when.
Yeah, and I've said that's going to be a league-wide problem. I think this is going to be one of the most difficult environments for a rookie class ever to try to make an impact early. Now, there are certain guys at the top of every draft who are so physically gifted they're going to be able to make some difference for their particular team. But when you start going down the draft board, I mean, learning schemes, learning offenses, that's a big part of it. So as a whole, this class throughout the league, people should, as I mentioned, they should pump the brakes because it's going to be really, really difficult for this group as a whole to hit the ground running. Maybe by the second half of the season, but early it's going to be terrible for them.
If
really
they start on time.
Yeah, if they start, and there's so many question marks, we don't even know if they're going to play. So we don't know how much training camp there will be. If you assume, as the Saints and Sean Payton has kind of done, and he told his players to forget about this virtual nonsense and just show up for training camp ready to go. If you assume that, you have 4 weeks, but it might not even be that. It might be 2 weeks, and you're ramped up for week 1 of the NFL season. And if that's the case, or if it's pushed back or anything worse than that, it's going to be even more difficult.
You talk about how, this impacts the rookies, and it obviously is going to impact a lot of players. But specifically, how do you think this impacts Andre Dillard, a player who we don't even know how they truly feel about him?
Yeah, I mean, young players as well. I mean, young players as a whole, that's somebody who needs practice and needs development and needs reps to get better. No question. So, and then I would add to that as well, free agents and guys changing teams across the league as well. I mean, it's going to affect far more than rookies, but at least the people who have been here, like Andre, and went through a rookie season, he kind of understands it from that standpoint. He understands the offense. There's some continuity. He knows what Jeff Stoutland wants. So he's ahead of the curve when you're comparing to, say, the rookie draft picks on the offensive line. But, yeah, I mean, anytime you have a young player in the early plan, and we'll see if the Eagles bring back Jason Peters or not, but the early plan was for him to be a starting left tackle. From the Eagles' perspective, yeah, it would have been better that he was able to go through OTAs and mini camp and a full training camp. So, yeah, it's going to impact everyone.
This sounds a little like Chris Long on the a podcast I heard him on the other day by saying, when you talk about preseason and how many games guys need, he says that's the problem. Every guy is in a different situation in terms of financial, what kind of camp battle they're in, what kind of situation, contract, team need, position battle, level of experience, on how much time you need. He said last year when he was going to come back to play for the Eagles, he said I needed 2 weeks. I was ready to go. But some of these younger guys, they do need that training camp, and they do need those preseason games so it's different for everybody.
Oh, sure. And I talk about this all the time with our friend Colin Thompson. There are certain guys who, Fletcher Cox, a perfect example last year. I mean, Fletcher didn't do anything, because he was coming off the foot surgery. Didn't do anything in training camp. Showed up. Wasn't quite himself week 1, but the point is he was ready to play. He was certainly competent. And veteran players like that, Brandon Graham in that category. You look at Jason Kelsey, Lane Johnson, Brandon Brooks, players like that who've done it time and time again. Yeah, they're like Chris Long. They probably need 2 weeks, and you might be giving them an extra. And that's really just to get yourself into football shape. They don't need preseason games. They don't need reps. For young players, for rookie players certainly, but even for young players as a whole who haven't played a lot, it's really, really important for them. So it is dependent on where you are in your career. And for Andre Dillard, a guy who was supposed to take that next step and become the starting left tackle in a situation where he's replacing a future Hall of Famer, the offseason was huge for him, and he's not going to have it.
All right, Sports Bash Live 97.3, football at 4. It's John McMullen at JF McMullen. Of course, no mini camps, none of that stuff. We'll keep our eye on the schedule, of course, on Thursday and all the NFL news right here on tomorrow's Football at 4. Thanks, John.
Hey, thanks, guys.